project.
Sorry
And
about that. Go ahead.
Matthew, most of us know him. He's the executive director of Rivertown Film Society for over 20 years. He's an amazing member of the community. And I know as an artist, every time I've gone to Matthew, he's right there listening and helping and offers so much to us all, plus all the films he brings. I'm so glad you're doing this, Matthew. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. I'm happy to do it. And thank you and Cheryl for doing all that you do. Yeah, my name is Matthew Sigg. I run Rivertown Film Society, a 20-year-old Rockland County arts organization. I'm a media specialist for New York Foundation for the Arts. And I've made films and exhibited films for many years. And at New York Foundation for the, I spent my life in film. It's all I've ever worked with is filmmakers. And New York Foundation for the Arts provides services for all artists and all disciplines, which is what I've really loved about it. It's not just for performers or visual artists or filmmakers. And it's really introduced me to the lives and work of artists in other disciplines and how we all work in different ways and how we work in similar ways. And in this discussion, I'm going to use the word filmmakers a lot. Sometimes I'm going to use the word artists, and sometimes I'll just refer to projects. And very possibly a lot of what I'll say will seem like it only relates to film, and it might not interest you. But you might think in terms of how could it relate to what you do? For instance, when I talk about tickets, or if I talk about tickets and audiences, can you think about customers, things like that? Because we all do, there's a great similarity in what we all do. But, and sometimes they're very specific to our disciplines as well. So I hope you'll put up with it if you're not a filmmaker. Tonight, I'm going to try to talk about how we got to where we are today in terms of fundraising, so that you'll have a little bit more of an understanding of what a funder is thinking about when they're reading your proposals and applications, and why the questions are the way they are. It's easy to answer the questions once you get the hang of the language, but there's something behind the language. There's a meaning to these things. And I think you'll understand, I hope you'll understand a little bit more about how we got to where we are today as a result of the historical part that I'm going to talk about. And seeing it through the lens of the people that read your proposals or listen to your pitches. I guess I should explain as well that I did this presentation once a couple of years ago, but I thought I would do it, but then I looked at it, I thought I should redo it. And I've been redoing it, and then I had to redo the PowerPoint. And I've had some serious technical difficulties that I was working on up until 15 minutes ago. A lot of what I'm going to end up doing is reading, because I didn't have time to really rehearse it. So I apologize for that. There's a lot of information here. And I also made this PowerPoint, another part of my technical difficulties, that is like the worst, exactly what they tell you not to do with PowerPoints. There's a lot of text. They're just basic. There's no graphics. It's not what I would like to do, what I had in mind. But the information is all here. And I hope that you'll put up with it and glean something about it. And I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to start with some basic assumptions that I have about fundraising. And I think that many of the fundraisers that I work with, and I do work with them a lot, where they're coming from and what their basic assumptions are too. So let me share my screen and get started. Okay, does that work for everybody?
Yes.
All right. I'm just going to read these off. A poorly written grant application can be overcome by great work samples and an interesting biography. Not often, but it's nice when it happens. Just don't count on it. I've seen maybe 3 or 4 in the last 10 years. Doesn't sound like much, but it's always shocking and exciting when when you get one of those. But it happens. People give to people, not to projects. They give to bad projects by great people more often than they give to great projects by bad people. I'm going to come back to this a lot. This is a standard, one of my standard things, that the funder has to get to know you. And the corollary to the above, friend making comes before fundraising. That one our development people at NIFA use all the time. They like that one. Funders reward work that best fits their, excuse me, funders reward work that best fits their own goals, not the best work. Your suspicion is correct. There is an in-club of artists who always seem to get grants and have films shown at important festivals. Another word for in-club is network, and you can join it. And you can have a satisfying career in the arts without getting important grants or exhibitions. So if it's not for you, there's still a place for you. If getting those prestigious grants and exhibitions is important to you, networking is, in my mind, the single most important thing you should be doing. And now I've skipped over. Okay, I'm gonna use the buttons. Yeah, networking in my mind is the single most important thing that you should be doing. I'm not talking about going up to people in a festival theater or theater lobbies or the art openings and making small talk. Well, that's a good skill to have. I'm talking about mundane things like buying tickets, showing up, and being part of your community, whatever community it is that you want to be part of. Show your art, write about art, contribute something interesting in the discussion, say hi to people who you'd like to know again and again. Eventually they'll notice you. Grant applicants whose names are familiar do have an advantage. And when you have a network, your name begins to become familiar. You have references, you have a pool of potential donors. And funders like to see that you have networks because they provide a seal of approval, a safety net, and networks help build audiences. Oops. Most investors and donors share a common goal, and that your work gets seen by as large an audience as possible. But some funders want to be associated with specific people or messages. Either way, they involve networks. So I'll get started. Pitches and grant applications, what funders want to know and why. No matter who you're fundraising for, in order for a prospective donor or investor to understand you, you have to understand them. Research the individuals and their interests and use this knowledge in your conversations, proposals, and applications. If you don't have any interests that overlap, they're probably not going to be a good fit for you. If you can determine where your interests do overlap, they are potentially a funder. But before you can sell them on your project, you need to sell them on yourself. One of their interests is always going to be you, your past, present, and future, not just your project, you. People give to people, not to projects. You may have a wonderful project, but if a donor doesn't trust you, they won't give to you. Conversely, investors and donors will give money to a project that they don't even care about because they want to work with the person who is doing it. The subject of your proposal is not just the project, it is you. Help them feel comfortable with who you are. Do that by understanding who they are. I've asked you to watch a 13-minute TED Talk titled The Art of Asking. If you saw it, you probably want to know why I assigned it as homework. So let's get started with it. It's going a little bit out of order, but we're going to start with The Art of Asking. Asking is a skill. Get good at it. Show that you can do it. In 2013, the musician Amanda Palmer gave a TED Talk titled The Art of Asking, in which she discussed why artists should be comfortable asking for money. Afterwards, she wrote a book on the subject that made the New York Times bestseller lists. The Wikipedia entry on the book brings up some interesting criticism. In the TED Talk, it was highly controversial at the time, but much less so now. My purpose in asking you to watch it wasn't just because of the content, though I like it. I've asked you to look at it because of how it reverberated through the fundraising community at a time when the business of music, journalism, and film had been going through a long period of disruption. Palmer's TED Talk arrived at the time that crowdfunding was still novel and not universally accepted. As she points out, she was the first musician to raise $1 million, a figure that gained a lot of attention, appeared in a lot of media coverage, and got the attention of nonprofit leaders who responded to it for reasons that I'll try to explain. Amanda Palmer became a part of a wider discussion going on in the arts organizations and granting institutions about how crowdfunding was a tool that promoted entrepreneurial skills, a degree of self-sufficiency, expanded the giving community, could help artists sustain their practices, created audiences who would promote the work because they financially backed it, and who could contribute to the sources of funding for the artist. Crowdfunding also worked with new, free, or inexpensive online tools like social media. The nonprofit world began discussing this TED Talk and sharing it with each other. Today, most of the comments that are found below this talk, if the version you find allows comments, are positive. At the time, half were angry. Some artists were furious. But before long, the artist's responsibility for developing an audience and turning them into funders, ticket buyers, CD and DVD buyers became dominant. And now funders often expect to see it in income projections that will include a mix of grants, earned income, and individual donations. Most professional funders do not expect or want to be your only funders. They want you to use their support to encourage others to support you. To put this in historical context, I'll use the example of filmmaking, but it could apply to any art discipline, some perhaps more than others. In the early days of independent filmmaking, distributing your own work was practically impossible. There was no internet for websites, for trailers, or for sharing links. There was no email. For a long time, there were no DVDs or VHS tapes. Purchasing a mailing list and selling postcards or information packets was costly and slow. Only gatekeepers such as distributors had the money, distribution channels, and networks to get a film into national release or into the educational market. An entire industry was built around getting films seen without the participation of filmmakers. And as long as they were busy and working, filmmakers were fine with that arrangement. Investors and funders had to hope that the films they funded attracted the interest of a distributor and that the distributor would know what to do to reach the right audience, neither of which was certain. The digital era changed print media, music, and finally film, eroding the dominance of publishers, distributors, and record companies, and creating new ways to participate in reaching audiences. Many film funders were founded in a time when it was largely impossible to self-distribute a film, and they'd often been frustrated by putting money into projects that sat on shelves and didn't reach their audiences. When resources started to become available that allowed filmmakers to distribute their own work, they began to take note. At the time that traditional film distribution was falling apart, following the pattern of disruption to music and publishing industries, a new industry was growing that could help filmmakers understand the distribution process and take on aspects of it themselves, retaining ownership of their work in the process. Funders saw in this a solution to the problem of films not being seen, and they became involved in helping this process through funding and distribution labs. It has become the age of the artist as entrepreneur, especially for journalists, musicians, and filmmakers, but also for any artist. It's not a new idea any longer now, but it is now the dominant idea, and nonprofit funders helped create and develop it. Undoubtedly, there are both winners and losers in this transition, but it was an unstoppable evolution of technology and capital. Many of the organizations who are funding artists today are intimately aware of how the business of art works and what the creator's role is, and why knowing your audience and nurturing your audience is important. They learned it from people like Amanda Palmer. They studied it, and they have helped institutionalize it. They want to see evidence that you're thinking about it yourself, and you're thinking about yourself and your work in an entrepreneurial way. What do I mean by entrepreneur? An entrepreneur is an individual, creates a business, bears the risks, and enjoys the rewards. Here are a few things that artists do that isn't making art: lecture about themselves, teach, produce shows, install shows, document their shows, store work, present studio visits, see other artists' work, compile mailing lists, and do mailings, supervise assistants, seek articles about their work, and seek opportunities to exhibit and distribute their work. These are all part of being an entrepreneur. To paraphrase Amanda Palmer, don't make people pay, help them pay. Make it easier for people to support you. Funders want to see you make it easy for people to, to support you. They need you to succeed, and they understand that what it takes, because they look it in the face every day. They look for your understanding of simple entrepreneurial business skills and numerous grant application questions, directly and indirectly. They want your fundraising strategy to include a mix of income from fundraising events, individual donations, grants, and now in many cases, crowdfunding. They want to see a progression of your work, that you know your audience, that you can get your work exhibited and appreciated. When this TED Talk was going viral, one of the arguments against crowdfunding was that it would lead to an era of bland art for the masses, that people would pay for what they knew, not what they know, not for the new. The assumption is that the way art is funded has an effect on what is produced. I would agree with that. That's the way it's always been. That's how our culture has worked, from religious institutions to royal families, to oligarchs, and now to audiences themselves. If that worries you, don't let it. The market for oligarch art is still going strong. Arguably, at least crowdfunding puts some control in the hands of artists and the audiences. Discussing Amanda Palmer's video and funders' expectation that artists have audience building skills, I've emphasized that audience building is one of the entrepreneurial business skills that puts more people in control of the more control in the hands of artists. Having your own audience influences gatekeepers and helps counter the power they hold. It helps level the playing field, making it easier for more voices and experiences to be brought into the arts. This can be seen as part of the democratizing of culture and giving voice to the voiceless. And that has been an important value to many funders since at least the 1960s, when the National Endowment for the Arts was created, then state art councils and regional, county, and municipal arts councils. It started with the administration of Lyndon Johnson. To understand his cultural agenda, you have to understand it was integrally related to his social agenda, which included the Economic Opportunity Act of 1964, the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the expansion of Social Security and creation of Medicare in 1964, the Wilderness Act of 1965, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, the Housing and Urban Development Act of 1965, the Freedom of Information Act of 1966, and the Public Broadcasting Act of 1967. It's an amazing series of accomplishments when put up against every single administration since then. In different ways, each of these programs are about providing access to what had been inaccessible, access that allows people to enrich their lives and to participate in the governing of their country. This idea was applied to the arts with the founding of the National Endowment for the Arts in 1965. While it was believed by the funders of the NEA that arts enriched lives, the founders of the NEA, that arts enriched lives and had benefits to health, well-being, and education, and that the arts were indicators to judge a civilization by, the major arts institutions, primarily led by a handful of larger museums, up to that time were not accessible to everyone. nor did everyone feel welcome in them. Public funding for the arts and public broadcasting were seen as a way to get art and art education to people who were left unaddressed by major arts institutions, and to support artists who have been neglected by these same powerful institutions. Public funding was established in large part to help all Americans have access to the arts, help all Americans reach their creative potentials, and provide attention to emerging art and artists who are outside established institutions. The values, support for creation and exhibition of art by and for everyone, and the funding that flowed from the NEA through the states had a cascading impact on how all arts philanthropy is conducted and art and funding is allocated, not just public funders and arts service organizations. From this background, organizations such as the Arts Council of Rockland and my employer, New York Foundation for the Arts, were created to support the arts in part by seeing that tax dollars are used to nurture and advance an arts culture that reflects all of its citizens. You'll find these values expressed by arts funders today in words such as diversity, inclusion, equity, accessibility, and representation that are found not only in state and local arts councils, but also private funding institutions such as the Ford and MacArthur Foundations, as well as public radio and television, service organizations like the Sundance Institute, and many major film and arts festivals. If you're seeking funds from organizations who use this language, you should address them. Where applicable, find ways to reflect these values in your story, your cast, your interviewees, your production team, your biography, your outreach, how and where you exhibit, and if you have one, your advisory board. I just talked about Amanda Palmer's Art of Asking and the story of the National Endowment for the Arts in reverse order, but they merge in a way that directly impacts the information that funders are looking for in funding proposals and applications. As well as the problem of work that's funded but not seen, there's been another huge problem for arts funders. Artists' careers are precarious, and supporting new art is much easier than sustaining the careers of artists, especially when they come from disadvantaged communities. Art schools teach art. They rarely teach the business of art. Providing information about the business of art is the domain of arts service organizations such as the Arts Council of Rockland, New York Foundation for the Arts, and a vast array of organizations devoted to specific arts disciplines. But before the digital era, conducting a business in the arts was a lot more expensive than it is now. As I pointed out earlier, there are few affordable alternatives to print advertising, which has always been expensive. Purchasing mailing lists and printing brochures was costly and time-consuming. Showing a film was not a do-it-yourself project, and there weren't practical ways to show samples or trailers, even into the VHS era. There were few film festivals, art festivals, or non-commercial places to show work. There were few ways for the public to see any work that wasn't commercial or didn't conform to traditional standards. Funders were providing grants for films that there was no way to distribute. The digital era disrupted a lot of traditional ways for doing business, but new inexpensive business tools began to appear. With a website, an artist can show off their work and take orders. With email, they can maintain contact with audiences, buyers, and gatekeepers, and promote work widely for practically nothing. With social media, they could expand their networks across the world. All of these made it easier to sustain a career in the arts. When crowdfunding appeared, no one knew what to think or if they liked it or not. But when serious money started to be raised on crowdfunding, it was a tipping point. When Amanda Palmer raised $1 million and explained how she did it in The Art of Asking, the world of philanthropy that was influenced by the Great Society programs began to see a breakthrough in the idea of arts entrepreneurism. Low-cost digital networking, communication, and business tools that make entrepreneurism within reach for almost anyone, and the values of diversity, inclusion, equity, accessibility, and representation could work together to level playing fields, democratize culture, and strengthen society in what some refer to the era of the artist as entrepreneur. Last summer, I was working on a grant application with a coworker And they asked me if I thought this well-known arts funder we were working on was using art to address social problems. I said that I didn't think that's the way they would describe it, but actually I'd go further and say that yes, all arts institutions have social effects on their communities. Before taking a short break for a question or two, I'm going to bring up one last insight into what excites funders. The following comment was written by an arts blogger discussing his observations of the proceedings at a national conference of grants makers in the arts, a meeting the very people who are reading your grant, a meeting of the very people who are reading your grant applications. It matters that we give, it matters to whom we give, and it also matters when in their development as artists we give. Reflecting on the conference proceedings, he continued with, as we strive to improve our grant making, how can we more effectively intervene with the right person at the right moment to make possible the commitment to a potential masterpiece or to a lifetime of creating excellent art? There's something special about support that comes at an early enough to turn a sensitive child into an artist, or that later comes at a moment when the artist must choose between art and another of life's demands. These aren't his ideas, they were his observations of what was being discussed. What stage of your career are you in, and how did it lead to your current project, and where will your current project lead? This is perhaps even more important for the for-profit world, but it's also common to see interest in this from nonprofit funders. They don't just want to support a project that has an impact for their mission and their goals. They want it to have an important impact on you. Show that it will. Show that your career has led you to this project at this time and how it will open new doors and change your path. Be passionate about it. So far tonight, I've been talking about some of the ways of understanding funders, what's important to them and why. And while they ask you about your art, they're also want to know about you and see evidence of your understanding of how to fund, promote, and get your work seen by an audience. Next, I'm going to look at some of the parts of a funding proposal or grant application and how what I've been talking about applies to them. But first, let's take a break for questions. Does anyone have a question about the history I've been discussing, the values of funders, the need to know your audience, the merits of crowdfunding, or why funders care about who you are or where you are in your career?
I got a question.
Great, thank you.
I have one comment and then a question. One comment is sometimes in my bios now, I call myself an artrepreneur.
Yeah, artrepreneur, nice.
Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
Good.
Just so I throw that in there.
I'll use it.
Yeah,
I'm stealing it from you.
go. I'm working on a grant right now, and you were talking about networking and using, letting them know you've been supported by such and such a person, or so that made me think. I have like testimonials by people I've had exhibitions at, like the gallery directors. Would you include that, like just like a quote from somebody in the grant?
Yeah, so you have to find the right place
that.
for it, right? Yeah, and sometimes you just can't find the right place and it's frustrating. But yes, if you can find the right place, and it might not be in the description, it might be in your biography. You might lead up to it and say, oh, I was working on this and then this happened. So it could be in a biography, or it could be in a discussion. Well, your team is sort of the same thing. There's just, you just have to find the right place. It could be maybe have to do with a sample that you're showing. Who knows? It's not always apparent. It doesn't always fit where you think it should fit, but you probably can find a place for it.
Okay.
Maybe not.
Thank you. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Any other questions?
I just have a comment if there are no questions, but it's hard to tell because I can't see, but.
Oh, I think Mary Ellen.
Okay, go ahead. Yeah. Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
Yes. Hi. Yeah, I have a project that I'm working on, and I'm not going to go into it, but it's the first project of this kind that I've done. It's a massive writing project, and I'm, shall we say, in my a late stage of my career, and I've been doing other things besides, you know, this type of project. And I sort of wonder about the kind of built-in ageism in funding, because what I'm seeing when I look at grants, there are a lot of grants that seem to want to support people early in their careers, which is understandable because, as you said, you want to, you know, spark people and enable them to move forward. But I'm just wondering about this idea of, you know, anything, grants being available for people who are older and who have not necessarily had a full career at the project, you know, on which they're working at the moment.
Yeah. Yeah, well, you're really, you know, you're correct. It's there is ageism is rampant, and it's not something that people really focus on or understand. There's a lot of other social issues that are, you know, that people are much more aware of and sensitive to, and ageism just, you know, doesn't have the same attention. So you're right in that way, but I don't personally see older people not getting grants. They do. It's a little bit different, because as maybe I've touched on, you know, where you are in your career is important to them. They want to have an effect. They don't want to fund the same thing that you've already done. They want your project to advance you and open you up to new ideas and change the direction you're going in. Presumably by an artist's late career, you know, they have funding sources or whatever. They found a way to have a living. And if they change that, if they want to change their direction, that's harder to get people to pay for. People want to pay for what they already know, what they've already done. And if you say, well, I'm going to do something new, they're like, okay, well, good luck with that. Let us know how it goes. So funders do like to see that, you know, this is money that not only is going to create this interesting project, but it's going to open this artist up to new possibilities. It actually is something that's exciting to see when an interesting person comes along with an interesting project that clearly is a new step for them. That's cool. So I encourage you to look at it that way. I think I should move on because I have a lot more talking to do, and we'll talk more later. So let's see. Slide 18, really? All professional fundraisers, no matter what the field, put a lot of time into researching exactly who they're approaching and how they can connect to them with shared interests, goals, and values. Nurturing a relationship that might go on for years, nurturing a relationship that may go on for years before an ask is even made. In filmmaking, equity investors and nonprofit funders have one very similar and primary goal. For investors, film audiences are a means to profitability. For granting institutions, audiences are the means to promote their mission. Investors and nonprofit funders have the same interest that the film they take part in must be seen. Often that means being seen by as many people as possible, but sometimes money is less important than being seen by just the right people. A funder may have an interest in reaching a specific audience or may focus on specific needs. If your project overlaps with a funder's interest in any way, address it. Don't quote your own website language back to them. Find ways to illustrate that your interests overlap. And that what is important to them is also important to you. Help them realize that your audience is one that they already have and know how to reach, or that they want to reach. Just because a funder is involved with social issues, focusing on education, social equity, or the environment, doesn't mean they're interested in your film about mental health. They are probably involved in a many years long focus on specific areas and are only interested in projects that support those interests. Determine what the goals of the funder are. These may change year to year or every few years. If they're clearly stated, keep them in mind as you write and look for ways to address them. Nonprofit funders are values-based and primarily seek new programs that complement existing programs and that provide consistent messaging across their different programs. Many private investors also have values, some just as strongly held as the missions of nonprofit funders. Disney prospers from a trusted reputation for family values, and their products all fill that specific distribution pipeline. The same is certainly true of individual investors. If you're pitching projects that are inappropriate to the interests of a funder, you're wasting your time and theirs. Now that you've narrowed your search, you're ready to write proposals and applications. Before you start, look at the goals of the funder, which should not be hard to find. Using your own words, refer to those goals in your proposal or answers to their questions. If you haven't taken time to to properly format a script, and I really literally don't read past the first line. That was a statement made by producer Ava DuVernay, but it could have been any one of a million people in just about any business. It shouldn't require much discussion. Those standard formats use standard formats and have someone proofread your applications. The person who's going to read it will be surrounded by work and looking for reasons to say no and move on to something else on their desk. Don't give them that reason before they even know what you're asking for. You'll need to demonstrate a wide range of knowledge and skills, including storytelling, putting together an appropriate cast of crew, managing a budget, a strategy for getting your film financed, and another strategy to get it seen. The very first thing to demonstrate is your knowledge of the rules and standards of proposal writing. Dispose of the idea that people reading your work have all the time in the world to figure out what you're saying and get immersed in it. They work at foundations, they're surrounded with money. Don't fool yourself into thinking that they have cushy jobs. Sometimes maybe they do, but often they're under just as much stress as everyone these days, overworked, underpaid, and stressed out. They're busy. Grab their attention immediately in the first few sentences. If they ask for a log line, a 2 or maybe 3 sentence description of your project, write something that explains the story while making them want to read more. Does it sound like a project that meets the goals of your funder? It has to be apparent. Your success may hang on a few sentences. Literally, right off the bat, grab their attention. Don't, if they have to read a paragraph without getting hooked, that's too much, really. Their eyes are going to wander, their mind is going to wander. Reading application after application after application all morning for days and days, it's tiring. It's really hard. They're looking for things that'll grab their mind. If you don't do it right away, you're lost. And by the way, not all grant reviewers will go beyond your application to look at your website, social media, or an internet search. But if they ask you for your website, they probably will be looking you up online. A private donor may or may not. An investor certainly will. The kind of internet presence you have is a good way for them to learn about you. People give to people, not projects. They want to feel secure with you. And going back to how to hook them, the way I traditionally write is I'll write a paragraph and I'll summarize it at the end with something really strong, a really strong sentence that really gets to the point of what the whole paragraph has been. And that's exactly backward. If it's at the end of your paragraph, they won't make it. If you put it at the front of the paragraph and then explain your thought process, they'll be grabbed by the first sentence and then they'll read through to see what else you've written, but grab them at the top, not at the last sentence. If they don't make it, they'll go to the next paragraph. The next paragraph will be the same thing, a bunch of argument until you get to the interesting point at the bottom. They do 2 of those paragraphs and they're fried. They're on to the next. Lead with the hook. Okay, storytelling. The project description. Are you really a storyteller? Successful fundraising of any kind always requires storytelling. In the arts, you're specifically asking for money to tell a story, to show that you are a storyteller. You may not have much space, but at least in one paragraph or a few sentences, don't just describe the story, tell it. Even if your proposal is for nonfiction, the narrative description of your film requires storytelling, not just description. As they read, readers are visualizing your words. Without any other guidance, the default visual when reading a description is a lesson or a lecture, which are generally not engaging formats. Even if your story is a lecture, it does not have to be generic. Describe the participants and the environment they are in. Set the scene using as few words as possible. Think of the visuals these following words bring to mind, and even feelings, memories, and associations they evoke. City street, residential street, industrial street, suburban street, tree-lined street, forest road, mountain road, and dirt road. Just a few words can tell vastly different stories. What is true of streets is true of landscapes, weather, rooms, cars, workplaces, bodies, and faces. All of them tell specific stories. Make economical use of words to tell a story in your writing that brings the visuals to mind. Make your description open a little world in the mind of the reader. At a webinar I watched about applying for a grant application for New York State Council of the Arts, they discussed a question that requested information about the applicant's community and demographics. It's a logical question, right? Who are you? Where are you? Who's your audience? As an example, they used it as an answer to this question that they especially liked, that the State Arts Council especially liked, was, my county has more deer than people. They loved that answer. I felt it gave them a unique understanding of the cultural context the applicant was working in. No doubt there was other information provided, but this part of the answer is what stuck because it told a story and created an image that wasn't a demographic bar graph. To get a donor to give, you have to reach their hearts and minds. Fundraising is an inspirational business. Inspire people, inspire them with your storytelling and your passion, just like Amanda Palmer did. If you're supplying a work sample, be sure that it lines up with your description. Not long ago, I was allowed to observe a panel as they reviewed applications. I hadn't seen the application or the sample they were discussing, but in the project description, I gathered that the applicant had explained how they used camera and editing technique to further the point of the story. The panel all bluntly agreed that they didn't see in the sample what the applicant was claiming in the description, and for at least that part of the application, they received a low score. You'll probably be asked for information about the sample and its relevance to your project. You may have an opportunity to describe the sample on the upload or link page. Don't use the same information that you provided in the application. Elaborate on it. Take advantage of having two places to provide information and provide unique information in each section. The budget. Does it tell the same story as your description? This is where a perceptive reader can learn a lot about your project and your ability to bring it to fruition. It places your description in a new context. The budget provides information that may be overlooked or minimalized in the narrative, and perhaps will give it new meaning. I see this regularly. There may be a great deal of travel that sends me back to the description to understand, or animation and special effects may be more expensive than what I expected. But what seemed like a big story may only have a few actors, or a small story may actually have an epic budget. The budget is a reflection of the description. Only when held up to a mirror, instead of showing words, it shows numbers. Those numbers tell the story. Make it tell the same story that is told in your description. Many filmmakers create expense budgets only because traditionally a producer or studio will pay for everything and would also figure out how to earn it back. Those days are pretty much over, and it is the filmmaker's job to figure out how their film will be paid for. Potential funders will look at an application like a business plan. After their contribution, How will the project be brought to fruition? As with a business plan, they expect you to provide an expense budget that shows the cost and the income budget showing examples of how your project will be paid for. They understand that this is guesswork, but they have the experience to be able to tell the difference between a realistic guess and an unrealistic guess. If you list grant amounts that are out of the range of a particular funder, other funders will spot it. They look at these things day in and day out. They know what other funders pay. If you list income from organizations that can take over a year to apply for and then receive funding for, and your timeline is to complete your project within the year, they'll spot it. And they'll look for your experience, your team, the sources of income that you list, and your fundraising strategy, and decide if they think you can succeed. Depending on the project, and not every project applies to this, funders often expect to see crowdfunding, fundraising events, and or individual donations as part of a project's income budget. It is part of the entrepreneurial skill of being a creator, a set of skills that, along with marketing and exhibiting your work, they want to see that you have or are willing to learn. There are certainly projects and fundraising plans that this is not relevant for, but your understanding of these skills is still part of being a professional in this field. For filmmakers, it is often not viable to fund a film entirely from grants. It can take time to nurture private donors to the point of making substantial contributions, but over time, their own funds will grow and so will their giving. Don't think only in terms of the project you're working on now. Think in terms of relationships that will continue for your career. In your audience today are your funders tomorrow. Your funders today want you to think that way. And I promise you that statement is absolutely true. Your audience contains your funders. It's happened time and time again. It's a key to success over the years, over your lifetime of your career. And funders do really care about that. They want to see that you're doing the thing that is going to sustain your career and lead to success later on in your life. The outreach and distribution plan, specifically, who is your audience? When asked who your audience will be, and every media maker, and media makers will always be asked this question, never answer that everyone is your audience, or even that you'll have a public television audience or an art house audience. It will lose your points and will reveal inexperience. Everyone translates as no one. Think about a hypothetical advertising campaign for your film. Who would your title appeal to? Who will your ad campaign graphics appeal to? Imagine a limited advertising budget. Where would you concentrate your limited resources? What newsletter, blog, magazine, radio, or television show would you advertise on? Drill down through age ranges, gender, family background, education, profession, hobbies, and interests. Find the people who will be most excited by your story. Audiences who are excited and enthusiastic will talk about the film and tell their friends about it. Then your project will have a better chance of actually becoming a film that everyone will hear about and want to see. Imagine your possible audience demographics and interests in a Venn diagram where the circles overlap is your core audiences. Partners and partner organizations. Next, how exactly will you reach this audience with limited advertising? Why is it limited? Because advertising can quickly add up to more than what your project cost is and more than you can earn back, especially if you're advertising to everyone, right? As you're developing your idea, think of potential promotional partners, organizations or influencers who have access to your core audience and will help you reach them in return for screenings for their members or their audience, or for acknowledgements to them made on your film credits or on a website. They may or may not be the same as sponsors who provide funding, but an article in a newsletter or a free ad from a media sponsor can be worth a great deal, and your potential funders will recognize that. They are looking for partners that you are recruiting. They expect it. If they don't see it, you lose points. From the very beginning of your idea, think of potential promotional partners. This includes the networks of your crew and, of course, your cast. Actors with fans are promotional partners. Soundtrack musicians can be promotional partners. A location can be a promotional partner through the local tourism agency, for example. A prop can be a promotional partner known as product placement. For issue-oriented films, organizations whose mission is to work on that issue can be a promotional partner. That is common, and the partner is usually involved in an educational campaign that continues the life of your project well into the future. If you have some experience, point to past successes as evidence that you have a following to draw on. The most powerful and effective answer to the question of who your audience is to be able to say that you have successfully reached an audience in the past and you will employ the same techniques to reach them again, whether you have an audience or customer base who follows your work and you know who they are and they're waiting for your next film, record, painting, play, or book. Unless you are well known, this may not be apparent to the person reading your proposal. How you answer the audience question will illuminate your entrepreneurial skills, and for some funders, it will help them understand how well you fit their interest and goals. What if your project doesn't have an audience because it is for research, documentation, archiving, or something similar? Many funders, especially those using taxpayer funded money, require a public benefit. You need to show that your project has one, not just a benefit to you, a benefit to the public. The benefit does not have to be free. Your biography. Why is this the right project for you right now? What are your qualifications to do this project? Do you have personal experience in it? Why is it important to you? How is this project an advance from your past work and career? How will it open new opportunities for you? Your past projects and associations do not simply show you where you are in your career. They give a funder an idea of the networks and connections you can draw upon, your ability to promote yourself and your project, and whether you have been building a following. If you are working with others, you may be asked for information on the other important participants as well. Your team and their backgrounds are important, not just because they have a needed skill. Do they complement you and elevate you, your project, and your network? If the project you propose is a step up from your past experience, will the team be of help, or are you all stepping up together? One of the most important indicators of success is the networks of you and your team, the people who know you or know of you. The independent world is no different in this way than the world of Hollywood studios. Editors, cinematographers, and producers can bring attention and value to a project, and the director, and especially the actors, add greatly to its financial value, not just because of their talent, but because of the size of their networks. That's what the star system is all about. On smaller scales, this exists in the independent film world, and I believe in the world of all arts disciplines. For that reason, as well as for evidence receiving serious attention, artists should include in their resumes lists of publications that they or their work have been mentioned in, and places where their work has been exhibited. Publicity and exhibition are important aspects of entrepreneurism. Your funder knows that these will be important for your next project to succeed, so they will be reassured if you have received publicity and exhibition in the past. If you're in an early part of your career and don't have anything to show, start working on it in small and local ways. Even if a publication or an exhibit doesn't reach many people, it's evidence that you are willing, able, and learning how to do it. You will also immediately discover that there are skills to these things and the necessity of doing them correctly. Publicity and exhibition become part of your network, a demonstration of your ability and evidence of where you are in your career. If you're starting out and don't have much to add to a resume, consider volunteering at a festival or other event. It shows your commitment is evidence of networking, and in fact can certainly lead to future work. But also consider that you're asking for money from people to whom giving is an important value. Show that you share that value and give some time to your community. You may be asked in the body of the application for your bio, and perhaps those of your associates, if you have them. This should not be the same exact information that's an attached bio or team bios that you may also be asked for. This is the place to emphasize your connection to the project, why this, why you, why now, and your connections to your associates and or their relevance to the project. The regular bio stuff and the resumes, CVs, whatever it is, those are attachments. When you're asked in the body of the application for biographical material, it all relates to the project. Just write it that way. It's one of the last things that people do, and they really just try to cut and paste from the resumes that they received from their team, and that just doesn't tell the story at all. It looks terrible. Remember, it matters that we give, it matters to whom we give, and it matters when in their development as artists we give, and people give to people, not projects. Letters of support. You may be allowed to include one or more letters of support. If so, you must do this. Anywhere in an application, it says, well, you can do this, or you can answer this question, or do you have this? It's not important if you don't. Actually, if they've asked, it is important that you do. Answer those questions. Find a way. Bullshit. Do what you have to do. If they suggest it and say you don't need it, do it. So find letters of support. They're really useful. They can make or break an application. If your project needs permission of someone else to take place, such as someone who owns rights or owns property you'll be using, or private or public, include a letter for that person, from that person or entity. This is crucial. It doesn't necessarily have to be a firm commitment. It can be something along the lines of, we look forward to working with you. Or it can be a letter from a funder or someone who is interested in distributing or exhibiting this project. Other letters are an opportunity to elaborate on your support network, your stature, interest in your project from a respected source, or a personal reference that might fill in or elaborate on information provided elsewhere. As you develop your project, start asking for letters to keep on hand for exactly this purpose. Hey, we're getting to the end. To summarize, we're living in the age of artist as entrepreneur, like it or not, and many people don't, but it's true. Entrepreneurism requires networks. Before a donor can understand you, you have to understand them. Don't describe your story, tell your story. Inspire funders with your storytelling and your passion. And finally, please do remember that people give to people, not to projects. I intentionally set out to talk about fundraising through the eyes of funders. In actuality, it's more like funding through the eyes of funding through my own eyes. But this is what I really think personally. The art world is large and complicated, and the way most people experience art making is outside of the concerns I've talked about here. That's wonderful, important, inspirational, and necessary. The art world, as I see it at New York Foundation for the Arts, is different from the one I see in Rockland County. And professionally, we often wish to bring these worlds more into line in terms of opportunities and income. But as we work to build and strengthen our community here, let's be careful what we wish for and build something better. Questions? Thank you. Don't be
was great.
shy.
Thank you.
There's got to be questions out there.
Do you want to stop sharing your screen so we can see people?
Yeah,
or
I could do that.
and
Sure,
maybe
good idea. What you have to do.
they won't
is
be
find-
shy.
There we go. Yeah. Hi, everybody. Nice to see you.
I have a question.
Jeffrey, are you asking a question?
Just in terms of, I'm a for-profit business, arts business.
Mhm.
In terms of funding, nonprofit versus for-profit opportunities, how would you describe the differences in what organizations are looking for, and also, is it a different opportunity? Do you go different places for that kind of funding? It's not necessarily an investor. I mean, I'm a mission driven
Yeah,
business.
you have a mission-driven business, and you're looking for funding. Some funders do not require nonprofit status. But for specific projects, you could get fiscal sponsorship and exist under the auspices of someone else. The Friends of the Nyack used to do it. I don't know who's doing it. Cheryl, is the Arts Council of Rockland doing fiscal sponsoring?
We don't know.
Okay, so there may not be any in Rockland County. There are others. There are professional associations that you probably belong to that may be fiscal sponsors. New York Foundation for the Arts would sponsor someone like you, but for a specific project within your company that has to be nonprofit. So you could set up a project that way, but there are funds, and now of course I can't think of any offhand, but not all funders require nonprofit status. I don't know, but could you be a little more specific about what you're thinking of?
Well, I run a creative arts therapy business, and I'm wanting to fund specific projects to help us expand our access to our programming and opportunities. So I'm wondering, traditionally, it would be like a nonprofit who might be applying for different types of grants, and things I've looked at have wanted it to be nonprofit. So I've toyed with the idea of becoming a nonprofit, but it just seems like our structure works well for what we do at this point. But I don't know if you talk about the shift in the crowdfunding and sort of how it's viewed as more positively now, where the artist is an entrepreneur. But I imagine many artists they're artists. They're arts entrepreneurs. They're not nonprofits. So I don't know if
exactly.
If they're changing, or funders looking at it differently now.
Yeah. So that is exactly what fiscal sponsorship is, and what I spend most of my time doing in New York Foundation for the Arts is working with fiscally sponsored filmmakers, sometimes other artists. But yeah, it's a individual who's not a nonprofit or their organization. They may have a LLC or an incorporation or whatever that makes films, and but they have one that's like they know is just a nonprofit. It's only nonprofit funders are going to want to fund it. Then no investor is going to want to get near it. It's issue oriented, or it's too experimental, or for whatever reason it's not going to be profitable. And yeah, they'll come and ask for fiscal sponsorship. I totally understand what the position you're in, and I sort of do agree that yeah, you could be a nonprofit, but it probably is not a good idea. You have more freedom the way you're set up, but I could imagine all kinds of projects that you would do that you could go to a fiscal sponsor for. And there's a lot of fiscal sponsors out there. Part of what you want to do when you look for, they'll charge different amounts, and they behave in different ways, and they work with you in different ways. So you have to do a little bit of research and find a good fit. And maybe there are specific fiscal sponsors for music. I don't know what the big nonprofit organizations are that are like service organizations for music. They may have fiscal sponsors, but NYFA exists. If you want to talk to me in the future,
Sure.
We'll talk about projects.
Is the project viewed differently when it's done through a fiscal sponsor? Is there a different as a funder, do they look at it with a different lens?
Well, it'll provide the nonprofit status, and all fiscal sponsors are different, and some of them are less reputable than others. So that can make a difference. That's something you want to look into, is that it's a fiscal sponsor that actually has some respect, and is financially healthy, so they don't go broke holding on to all your money. But it can it can enhance your project to have the right fiscal sponsor. It's not going to hurt it, except that some funders, if it turns out that they don't care if you're a nonprofit, they will do it with you directly because they don't want 8% to go to New York Foundation for the Arts. They want it to go to you. I mean, it's not that they don't like New York Foundation for the Arts, but they want to support you, not us. So you can go both ways. You can have a project in fiscal sponsorship that also accepts money that does not go through fiscal sponsorship. It gets complicated. It's a boring subject, frankly, so let's move on. But yeah, I'd be happy to talk to you, Jeffrey.
Sure, okay. Thank you.
Anyone else? It is a little bit after 8. I do have, I thought someone was going to say, well, do you have an example? So I do have an example. If you'd like me to give an example, I'll do that. You have time, Cheryl? Is this okay?
Oh, yeah, I just, Juliana looked like she was going to
Oh,
ask a
Juliana, I'll
question.
definitely answer a question for Juliana. Hi, Juliana.
Hi. This might be a long answer, so
That's okay too.
I was just curious, at the end you said like you thought there's an opportunity for local arts orgs to do something different than like what you see in bigger cities. So I was just curious what that might be, or like what you would hope how funding in local communities might be a different opportunity.
I don't, I don't know. Glad you asked the question, and I don't know. And I'm glad I don't know, because it's kind of discussion that has to happen by artists and other organizations. And it's just, the point is that the New York art world is not necessarily something they want to replicate. Yeah, it's important for money. It's important to earn money. It's important to be able to sell your work for what it's worth. But there are other aspects of that world that don't need to be replicated. And there's something really, really nice about community that makes art because they love it. And yes, they're trying to earn income from it. And that's important. And we all should be allowed to do that. But the feeling of the enjoyment of it and the community building aspect of it is something that you don't want to lose. So that wasn't a long answer. It's something that everyone should think about, like how, as we develop our county to be more hospitable to the arts, how can we keep it humane and artist-centered? Not that I don't think that happens. I think that does organically happen, but it's let's just be wary of how changes happen.
Maybe one last question if there's any. Oh, Vera.
Oh, hey, Matthew.
Hi,
Hey,
Vera.
everybody. Nice to see you. I thank you for your presentation. I watched the 13-minute video, and I just was really curious. The artist there, Amanda, talked about giving work away. I get the part about interacting with your audience and learning to ask for help rather than demanding payment, and versus the asking for help versus scarcity, keeping it scarce and unavailable so people have to pay for it. But what do you think about that model in general? Because it's not for everybody to take off their clothes in a Berlin nightclub. Even if they are willing to be vulnerable and ask for help.
You're not going to take your clothes off in the Berlin nightclub?
So,
Yeah, no, Amanda Palmer is a unique human being, and there's no way that any of us are going to be like her. That's for sure. And to be honest, you know, she went into that crowdfunding campaign with a huge audience. She's a successful musician. I think that the way she described the evolution to that point, starting off as a statue in the street, that was pretty effective. But giving away things for free, I used to be much more in favor of that than I am now. I still am in favor of it, and I'll explain why. And that is because, as I said to start off, that I think the single most important thing for an artist to have is a network. And what would you rather have? Would you rather sell to a really small number of people, or would you like to give it away to a really huge number of people that become part of your network? There are times when giving away makes a great deal of sense. It can really expand the people, you know, that you're in touch with. Yeah, you have to figure out how you do it. If you just hand it out, then that doesn't really get you a connection to them. If you ask them for, you know, their email address, well, that can be a really powerful thing. So, in the other way it can be useful, say in the case of a local publication, say Nyack News and Views. If you write a column for them for free, you start to develop a local audience that appreciates your expertise in a certain area. They may become customers, or you may end up with a dozen really good articles that have been published that then you can go to a slightly larger publication and be paid for your work, and so on and so on and so on. It's a great way to get started. It expands your network. It's free. It's out there. People are reading it. People are admiring it, taking your advice. They may come to you for advice and pay you for advice. And you can use the evidence of having been published for a reasonable publication. It's not that embarrassing. It's a good local rag to get you writing gigs in the future. So what's the downside? It's free. You know, you've done it for free and you're building something. So there are different ways to use free. I'm not as crazy about it as I used to be, but it's still useful.
Thank you.
All right. I'm gonna do it anyway. I know it's 8:15 and Cheryl wants us to sign off, but I'm gonna give you an example. It's not a specific example because, frankly, every application, every art project is so different from every other art project that a specific example doesn't really work. But I'll tell you about a year that I was helping my artists apply for a very big grant. And I don't know, I guess about 35 applied for it and 5 got it. And I decided I would look at the 5 and see if there was anything that was similar in them. And amazingly, there were a whole lot of things that were similar about them. And this is what they are. The projects all supported cultural inclusion in some aspect of their application. All of the 5 projects had participated in an underserved community of some kind. Think this through. Your own project may serve an underserved community that you're not thinking of. Many films, music, art projects do. Most films do. We just don't think about it that way because we're not trained to think about it that way. But all of these 5 proposals had good aspects of cultural inclusion. Each application had a project director and a team that were in the appropriate time in their careers for their particular project and budget. And each project moved their career forward. And that's in answer to the first question I had. That's a really exciting thing. Funders like that. They like to see here's a trustworthy person, a person that's built a career, a person that has talent, and look at this interesting thing that's not what they did before, but builds on it in some way. That's an exciting moment that people like to participate in. And number 3, the proposals all clearly showed why the filmmaker was the perfect person for their particular project. Usually there was more than one reason. For example, the filmmaker's personal life experience, they had experience in the story. And the filmmaker was following up on a previous project that successfully had attracted a similar kind of audience. And sometimes there could be a third or even fourth, they overlapping reason that they were right for this project. And here is an example of an applicant hitting all 3 points. They had very little, if any, filmmaking experience, but they had some professional experience as a writer on subjects other than their film. And they did have a work in progress that well illustrated their description. They were a lifelong fan of a niche form of cultural expression that was unusual for someone of their background to have, which was an interesting element. And they claimed knowledge and excitement for this art form from a very early age, from a child. As a child, they were fascinated by this thing that had nothing to do with their own background, but they were drawn to it. They identified a very specific cultural group who had embraced this art form, which few people would have expected, and whose own community was also little known. So a whole community of people had responded to this particular art form, and it was a community that you wouldn't have expected. To begin the project, it was self-funded, and the director formed relationships with some of these people and began to follow and fill them. Though the filmmaker did not have filmmaking experience, they learned the basic skills and illustrated not only a fierce desire to share what they had discovered, but also a love of documentary film, going so far as to state in the application that for years they had seen every single documentary that had opened in a theater in the city in which they lived. It's an outlandish proposition, but they made it, and at the time it was conceivable. And in the city she was in, yeah, maybe so. But that's the kind of statement that'll get your attention. So they had an underrepresented subject and audience. They had no previous filmmaking experience or particularly strong resume. They were a journalist who demonstrated their ability in their work sample and had an appropriate budget, which was low, by the way. And they had an interesting sounding, and they were an interesting sounding person who had identified an unusual project, and they had a lot of passion for it. But, and she was one of the 5 people that were granted funds that year. And I have to say, since that year, I always look at successful grant applications when there's more than one to see what they share. And I've never seen the same level of similarity across each application. There's just no secret recipe. Work to understand your funder and their interests, goals, and values. The better you understand them, the better they're going to understand you.
All right, well, that was an incredible amount of information.
Yeah,
Thank
sorry,
you
maybe
so
a little
much.
bit too much.
No, I meant that in a very positive way. It was fantastic. And I'm really glad that we recorded this. So, you know, if there isn't anything else, Matthew, I want to thank you so much for spending the evening with us. Thank you to everybody here. We will send the recording to everyone who registered. I will also ask you to complete a very quick survey when I send that out. So if you wouldn't mind helping us with that, it helps us develop future programming and bring these workshops to you. So with that, unless there's any other burning closing statements, I will wish everybody a good evening. If you're not a member, I hope you visit our website and learn about all of the different benefits of membership for the Arts Council, getting to attend workshops like this being one of the most critical. So that's all I got. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Matthew.
Thank you.
You're
Thank you,
welcome.
Matthew.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Good
Thank you,
night.
Matthew.
Great.
Thank
Valuable.
you.
Have a
Bye-bye.
great night.
Great night, everyone.
Great night.
Thanks, Matthew.